There's something starting to build around the next Star Wars Jedi 3, and it's not coming from one clean reveal or one big announcement. It's coming from scattered leaks, insider reports, and small but consistent pieces of information that all point in the same direction. And the one thing that keeps showing up over and over is that this next game is trying to go further than Star Wars Jedi Survivor ever did. Not just bigger, but darker, more personal, and a lot more risky in how it handles its story and player freedom. The biggest thing right now, and the one that's hard to ignore even if you're skeptical, is the timing. Multiple reports are pointing toward a reveal on May 4th, which is obviously not random. Star Wars Day has become the place where big announcements happen, and even if everything else in these leaks ends up shifting or changing, this part actually makes sense. A teaser, a logo, something small but official, it lines up too well, and then after that, the expectation is a much bigger showing during the summer, likely at Summer Game Fest, where gameplay would finally be shown and the direction of the game becomes clear. That's the rollout that's being talked about right now, but the real conversation is around what the game actually is, and this is where things get more interesting. The story details that are circulating suggest that Cal Kestis is in a very different place compared to before. He's older, more experienced, but also dealing with something heavier, this constant pull toward the dark side, and instead of just flirting with that idea like before, the report suggests the game actually leans into it properly. There's talk about him eventually reaching a point of balance, even purity, which is where the white lightsaber comes in. That's not just a cosmetic change. In Star Wars lore, a white saber usually means something very specific, someone who's gone through corruption and managed to cleanse it. If that's true, then this game is clearly trying to push Cal's arc into something much more final, much more defined. Then there's the situation with his family, which is probably the most unexpected part of all this. The idea that Cal now has a daughter, whether biological or adopted, and that Kata is now fully part of that dynamic changes everything about the tone. This isn't just a lone survivor story anymore. It becomes something about responsibility, about legacy, about protecting something fragile while still being hunted. And the detail about conflict between the two girls hints at something deeper going on, something that could tie directly into the game's themes of balance, control, and identity. It's a risky direction because if it's not written well, it falls apart fast, but if it works, it could easily be the strongest narrative this series has had. On the gameplay side, the direction sounds like it's evolving in a way that makes sense, but also raises a few concerns. The mention of moral choices being introduced, something closer to Marvel's Spider-Man, Web of Shadows, or even Ghost of Tsushima is interesting, but the fact that these choices reportedly won't affect the ending is something that people are going to question. If you're giving players the ability to lean into different styles, different philosophies, even different moral directions, but it all leads to the same outcome, then it risks feeling a bit surface level. At the same time, if the moment-to-moment experience changes enough, how characters react to you, how missions play out, how Cal behaves, then it could still add a lot to the game even without branching endings. Combat also seems to be getting expanded again, with things like a double blaster stance being mentioned. And if you played Survivor, you already know that the blaster stance was borderline overpowered in certain situations. So the idea of pushing that even further could either be a lot of fun or completely break the balance if they're not careful. There's also talk about the game being more open, more brutal, more grounded, less of that slightly segmented structure and more of a connected world where exploration feels natural instead of guided. That's something people have been asking for, but it also puts pressure on the design. A bigger world doesn't automatically mean a better one. And then there's the part that should probably make you pause a bit. Just like with Survivor, it sounds like the story and the game are being developed at the same time again. That's not ideal. One of the reasons Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order felt more focused is because its narrative foundation was already solid before everything else was built around it. Survivor felt more uneven because of that overlap, and if the same thing is happening here, there's a real chance this third game could run into similar issues. It doesn't mean it will fail, but it does mean expectations should be kept in check. What's clear though is that this isn't a safe sequel. Everything being said about it points to a game that's trying to evolve the formula instead of just repeating it. A darker tone, more personal stakes, more player player expression and a bigger world to support all of that. And if the fall 2026 window holds, then we're not that far away from actually seeing how much of this is real and how much of it changes before release. Right now, this feels like one of those situations where the potential is obvious, but so are the risks. If they land the story, if they refine the combat instead of overloading it, and if they actually make those player choices feel meaningful even without multiple endings, this could easily be the strongest entry in this series. But if they repeat the same structural issues and just scale everything up without tightening it, then it could end up feeling messy again, just on a bigger scale. Either way, the next month matters a lot, because if that May 4th reveal actually happens, that's when all of this stops being speculation and starts becoming something real. And if you go deeper into what's been reported and talked about around this game, there are even more signs that this isn't just a standard follow-up. It's trying to shift the identity of the series in a bigger way than people might expect at first glance. Some of the articles and insider reports are pointing toward a much heavier focus on tone and atmosphere, not just in the story, but in how the world itself feels to move through. There's talk about a more grounded and gritty presentation overall, which lines up with the idea of Cal being pushed closer to the edge before finding balance. Less clean hero moments, more tension, more situations where things don't go the way you expect. There's also increasing discussion about the scale of the game expanding beyond what Star Wars Jedi Survivor attempted. Not necessarily a full open world shift, but something closer to large interconnected regions that give you more freedom in how you approach exploration and objectives. That matters because one of the biggest criticisms of the previous game was how it sometimes felt segmented despite its size. If this next one actually connects those spaces more naturally, it could completely change how the game flows, especially when combined with the rumored moral choice system. Even if those choices don't alter the ending, they could still shape how you move through these areas, who you align with in certain moments, and how situations escalate or de-escalate. Another detail that keeps coming up is how the game is supposedly leaning more into player expression through combat styles and progression rather than strict builds. Instead of locking you into one approach, it sounds like the game is doubling down on letting players shift between styles depending on the situation, whether that's aggressive, controlled, or more defensive. The double blaster stance fits into that idea, but it also raises the same concern again. If they don't rebalance things properly, certain playstyles could dominate too easily, and given how powerful some options already felt before, this is something they absolutely have to get right. There's also a bit more context now around the story direction and why it might feel different. Some reports suggest that the narrative is being treated as something more fluid during development, which again ties back to that same issue of writing and production happening side by side. But at the same time, it could also explain why the themes being discussed, purity, control, internal conflict, feel more central this time. It's not just about surviving anymore, it's about defining who Cal actually becomes by the end of all this, especially with the added pressure of having people depending on him.